Arizona State University. The center's mission is to rebuild the voice and power of working people through our research, convening, and organizational support. I'm here today with a number of my colleagues from the Center for Work and Democracy, including, why don't you raise your hand when I say your name, Ben Fong, who will be speaking with us later, Maria Esch, Kayla Lee, and Ian Sherwood, and Craig Calhoun. And Carolyn Forbes. Carolyn Forbes, I saw Carolyn earlier too. Carolyn Forbes. Please say hello to them over the course of the day. They're terrific people. Our purpose in being here today is simple. We think economic development should serve working people and communities, as well as shareholders and customers. We think that the semiconductor industry can and should be a high-road industry that does just that. Unfortunately, all too often, economic development does not meet that standard. The issue is complicated, certainly, and wrapped up in slogans, ideologies, interests, and identities that can obscure the core issues around any kind of economic development. Most basically, we often associate progress or improvement with economic growth and the economic development that can drive that growth. When communities are confronted with the prospect of industrial or corporate investments, the incentive is often straightforward: jobs. Jobs mean livelihoods or even affluence. They mean security and stability. These things in turn can help communities thrive as wages become spending power that drives other businesses to emerge and provide livelihoods to more people. The costs, or in economic parlance, the externalities of these investments are whispered rather than shouted, or are viewed as just part of the price to be paid for growth and economic well-being. Those costs can be burdens on public infrastructure, environmental pollution, the extraction of wealth and its transfer to other cities and states, strains on limited resources, disruption of other economic activities, or health impacts on workers and neighbors. This calculus is well known in mining and factory towns around the world. In the 1970s, thinkers like the conservative sociologist Daniel Bell started imagining a new kind of society that wasn't built on the dirty, extractive, and exploitative practices of industrial capitalism. Instead, what was emerging out of the confluence of university-based research, corporate R&D, and industrial policy, which in the United States was usually led by the Defense Department, was a knowledge society that would privilege knowledge workers. These workers would act for the benefit of humanity and not for privatized profit. The utopian imagination of the knowledge society held that connecting industry to the values of science would produce a society that rested more on improvement and progress than on the hoarding of profit. Class conflict would be overcome, and technical solutions would be found for society's problems. For Bell, if this went wrong, it would be because of a new class conflict between the educated and credentialed experts and those who lacked such status, but were nonetheless affected by the decisions of those experts. A fairly prescient analysis, all things considered. Nonetheless, built into Bell's vision and those of other contemporaries who were thinking about a post-industrial society was a new kind of society that rested on knowledge in the service of humanity. This, in turn, helped prepare us for the idea that knowledge industries, or what came to be known as high-tech industries, had fewer externalities than traditional industry, that they were cleaner, less exploitative, less disruptive, and more closely aligned with the public interest. High tech was associated with high road. Writing in 1992, another sociologist, Ulrich Beck, who had seen partially how this new post-industrial society was unfolding, put a damper on this vision by noting that the systems and industries being built by these knowledge workers and engineers had their own set of problems. Put simply, the more complicated the system, the more knowledgeable and high-tech it was, the more susceptible it was to unanticipated risks. Moreover, our dependence on these systems to survive as the planet becomes hotter and more crowded meant that we were all becoming more vulnerable to the unanticipated risks built into these systems. We now live in a society of unanticipated and difficult to foresee risks. If you're looking for an example, look no further than the ongoing nuclear meltdown at Fukushima, a plant that was built successfully to withstand an earthquake, but not the tsunami that followed. Thinking in terms of chips, semiconductors have enabled the transformation of our day-to-day existence, such that extraordinarily complicated tasks can now be handled by devices that we carry in our pockets. These devices make our lives better in countless ways, but also create new, unanticipated problems. And as with the production of the components of these devices, a narrative of progress and improvement causes us to be slow to see the negative effects of them. Increased social alienation, a decline in the social skills that it takes to navigate the world when you don't have a cheat sheet in your pocket, and increasing vulnerability to manipulation, and a wholesale transformation from a society organized to serve the crowd to one organized to serve the queue. In terms of production, we now know that high tech can be dirty and exploitative. The lithium we use in our batteries requires extractive techniques that look at least as bad as the strip mining of gold and copper. A high-tech society is generally an energy-intensive society, and apparently the solution to that need is to build more nuclear power plants, despite the fact that we still haven't figured out what to do with the waste from the old ones. Or put more coal miners to work, despite the danger and environmental consequences of that work. Chip fabs themselves, as I discovered particularly yesterday as I was driving around with Lenny Siegel, Rand Wilson, and others, look clean with their office park exteriors and bunny-suited workers. But behind that facade are structures that look like oil refineries, and with good reason. These are chemical companies that are often situated in the middle of residential neighborhoods. While the Valley develops the local economy by being friendly to chip fabrication, it still hasn't cleaned up the Superfund site from an earlier generation of chip production. Instead, it has turned a blind eye to its existence and built a new residential neighborhood right on top of it. The CHIPS Act has underpinned much of the investment in repatriating chip production to the United States. But it has nonetheless failed to secure the environmental well-being and work protections of communities and workers. But that doesn't mean that the companies themselves can't do better. Companies might hope that the association of high tech with cleaner and less exploitative jobs carries them through despite extractive practices, exploitative labor relations, unsafe working conditions, the huge drain on scarce resources like water and power that is required, and the inevitable environmental externalities of their activities. Or it could choose to work with communities and labor organizations to make the promised equation of high tech with high road industry a reality. Given that the entire industry is subsidized by public money, our money, this should be less a hope and more of a reality. We are here today to talk about that possibility by talking about the very real dangers associated with this industry, but also to talk about how to realize the full promise of chip production in the Valley. We have scholars and activists with us today from around the world, some of whom have been tracking and monitoring this industry since the 1980s. So they should bring us a lively, knowledgeable, and informative conversation. Finally, before we get started, I want to offer a very special welcome to CHIPS Communities United, which is hosting us today. They are the ones who put together the work and of not only of this event, but of monitoring this industry and bringing together people to try and figure out better ways for it to function. Also, I want to introduce the people sitting up here with me right now who will be speaking on this first panel. First, Judith Barish, who is the director of CHIPS Communities United. Mark Xu, who is joining us from the Environmental Rights Foundation in Taiwan, and Sanjeev Pandita of the International Campaign for Responsible Technology. Thank you. I also would like to just note a couple of things about the agenda. After this panel, we will be talking about workers in the semiconductor industry. Notably, we're going to have breakouts in this session, so we're all going to have an opportunity to talk together. It won't just be speaking from the stage. We'll be able to bring all of you into a conversation around these issues. We'll have lunch from 12:15 to 1:30. Then from 1:30 to 3:15, we'll be talking about the environmental challenges of chip production, which will also be a breakout session. So again, you'll have the opportunity to talk with everybody else. And finally, we'll have a closing plenary that will go from 3:15 to 4:15. Welcome, everybody. Very glad to have you with us today. And now, Judith Barish.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, everybody. It's really exciting to see everybody all in one place. As Michael said, I'm the coalition director of CHIPS Communities United. We're a national coalition of unions, environmental groups, advocacy organizations, dedicated, you probably can't read my slide, to equity, good jobs, community benefits, and environmental protections in communities impacted by semiconductor manufacturing. I do just want to introduce our coalition a little bit. These are the steering committee members in our coalition, and a number of folks are here today. We have people here today from the Sierra Club, from Jobs with Justice, from the International Campaign for Responsible Technology, from the UAW, Center for Public Environmental Oversight, and the Painters Union. So thank you all for being here. What a great team. That's not our whole coalition, though. We have 35 plus or minus member organizations around the country as well, and hundreds of people who we talk to on a regular basis and we work with. And here's a picture of some of our folks and an action that happened in Phoenix earlier this year. So CCU came together after the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act in 2022. That's a federal law that was designed to restore semiconductor manufacturing to the United States. Semiconductors were first invented in the US, they were produced here, but most of that production moved overseas in the 80s and 90s. And the act invested, well, my slide says $52 billion for domestic semiconductor manufacturing, but there's actually a lot more money because there are massive, massive tax credits that semiconductor manufacturers are eligible for that add up to probably another $100 billion. We don't really know exactly how much public money, but a huge amount of our public money was invested in this project, and it was enormously successful. It catalyzed $600 billion in private investments, 130 projects, new projects in 28 states, including many here in Arizona, and according to some math, I'm not sure about this math, but up to 500,000 jobs nationwide. So in many ways, this has been an enormously successful effort, an example of industrial policy, which is using the power of government to influence the markets. Arizona has been ground zero for this effort, and I just grabbed a few random headlines about Arizona. America's semiconductor hub, the center of the semiconductor universe, home to the largest single foreign direct investment in US history, a semiconductor powerhouse, you get the idea. So you know it, it's all around you. And the dominant narrative about the return of the semiconductor industry is celebratory, that this has been a massive success. Chips are back. Great jobs for everybody. It's powering the AI boom, boosting local economies. It's clean, it's green, it's high tech. As Michael said, they wear those white bunny suits, so it must all be really clean. But we are here to tell a different story. Because while that narrative is unbelievably dominant, it's not the only story. And that's what we're talking about today, the darker side of the semiconductor boom. And when I talk about dominant narratives versus the narrative that we're telling, somebody said, I think you're fighting kind of a David and Goliath battle, aren't you? And I said, I think that we're like a flea on David's head fighting Goliath, because we're challenging the might of some of the world's most powerful and highly capitalized companies. So what we know, and what the founders of CCU knew when they pulled the coalition together, is that the semiconductor industry has a terrible track record, both as an employer and a neighbor. And you're going to hear a lot about that in the next two panels. I'm going to give a little preview. Low wages. They're high-tech jobs. They're supposed to pay a lot. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Exclusion and discrimination in the workforce. Semiconductor manufacturing is largely done by white men. Women and people of color are almost non-existent at upper levels of management and are concentrated in the most poorly paid and dangerous jobs in the industry. And actually, the amazing thing is that's actually gotten worse since the 1990s. It's a ferociously anti-union industry where workers who try to organize have historically been fired, blacklisted, and retaliated against, all of which are illegal, but the companies have done it anyhow. Workers also have to deal with toxic workplace chemicals. As my colleague Lenny Siegel says, who you'll hear from later today, a semiconductor factory is a chemical factory. It uses thousands of chemicals. We, the public, have no right to know what those chemicals are, and there's no requirement that they be tested for safety. But we do know that many of them are ferociously dangerous. And historically, workers have suffered as a result of that. There's a generation of women in the Silicon Valley area who suffered from miscarriages, stillborn babies, and children born with birth defects. Environmental contamination in neighborhoods. Sometimes these toxic chemicals don't go where they're supposed to go. They come out in the air, they come out in the water. Again, looking at Silicon Valley, it's got more poisoned Superfund sites than any other county in the country. And finally, vast use of natural resources, including electricity and water. Water, obviously, should be of particular concern if you happen to place massive factories in the middle of a desert. So yeah, I wanted to go into a little bit of detail about some of these. I won't go into detail about all of that, obviously, because you have a full day to hear this. But everybody assumes that these are great jobs. And when the CHIPS and Science Act was announced, there was official statistics that said the average wage in the semiconductor industry was $130,000. Well, it depends on how you get that average. If you're averaging in executives or lawyers, it looks a little different. So I looked at government data. So production workers, who make up 38% of employees, that's the largest single group, and it's the group of workers that you're likely to enter if you don't have a fancy degree, earn an average wage of $46,000. So it's not peanuts, but it's certainly not a good family-sustaining wage. And of course, many workers are below that. If you're an assembler or fabricator, which is 18% of semiconductor employees, a subset of the production workers, the average wage is closer to $40,000. The reason why the average looks high is because it gets averaged in with, say, lawyers. Their average wage in the industry is $222,000. So these are not great jobs, and when workers try to organize to raise their wages to protect themselves from toxics, they face harsh union-busting tactics. I also want to talk about toxic contamination threatening communities. I know we'll have some folks here today, I'm not sure if they're here yet, from Vistancia who have, our Vistancia folks are here. Hi, folks. You're going to hear about this later, but this is a real victory that the neighbors in Vistancia learned that they were going to have a massive semiconductor supply chain company, Amcor, move into their planned community where they had been told they were going to get a high-end shopping center with restaurants and a mall and so on, right near schools and parks and neighborhood where people had relocated to live. And they were worried about the toxic contamination. I'm going to let them tell the story later, but the good news is they pushed back and they won, and Amcor was moved out of their neighborhood. Congratulations. But so what were the fears of folks in Vistancia and the worries of people all around the country? Well, here's a little bit of history. And then I didn't have to go very far back. This is not the 80s and the 90s. In 2022, Samsung in Texas spilled acid waste into a nearby river. For months, the river turned orange and all aquatic life died. In 2023, Intel in Oregon accidentally left its air pollution mitigation equipment turned off for 2 months. What kind of worker does that? And they were only fined $30,000. And Global Foundries in Vermont, this they weren't even breaking the law for. They just released toxic forever chemicals into the river because there's no federal law against it. So these are some of the concerns that we have around the semiconductor industry. But the point of being here today and the point of our coalition is that it doesn't have to be this way. High tech doesn't have to be a low road. CCU's vision is that semiconductor factories could be models of high road economic development. If we as taxpayers are bringing this industry back to our country and forking over not just the federal money, but state incentives and local incentives, if they're coming into our community, we have the right to make it the industry we want. Good union jobs in production and construction. State-of-the-art environmental safeguards for communities. rigorous occupational health and safety standards and enforcement, and accountability to local communities. And the accountability is really important because we can decide who benefits from this industry. It's an open question whether pro-business means pro-community. And if people like us, if workers, if neighbors, if community members have a voice in the industry, we can make it an industry that we are all proud to have in our communities. So the good news is that every community with a semiconductor factory, and that's all of those spots on the map, is a chip community. And every chip community has the opportunity to shape the industry. Semiconductors power our world. I could have started with this, but I think you know it already. They're in our phones, they're in this little clicker, they're in the cars you drove in here. We took a Waymo over here. I can't even imagine how many semiconductors there are in that. And semiconductors are the hardware for our current technological moment. So our aspiration is to make sure that the workers who make semiconductors and the neighbors who live nearby have a direct say in the industry. And we do that through demands for collective bargaining and community benefits agreements. And there's another picture of some of our team. That was right outside of TSMC. We took that picture, and 2 minutes later, the security guard at TSMC came and threw us out. So we're here today at a historic moment. I meant to pick up a magazine that my colleague Rand brought from SEMICON West about Arizona as the center of the semiconductor world. But just down the street, there are 30,000 people gathered at a semiconductor trade show. It is here. This is the moment. The US has successfully reshored semiconductor production. We've proven that industrial policy can work. Government can shape economic production and markets. There's a bipartisan commitment to the industry. Regardless of who's in the White House, it's clear that the political powers that be are supporting the return of this industry. And so it's an opportunity to avoid the mistakes of the past, to try to shape an industry that works for all of us, to decide who will benefit and who will lose. We believe that only if communities and workers have a voice in these economic decisions can we make sure that everyone benefits from the chip boom. So thank you for being here. Our mission today is to tell a different narrative about this celebrated industry and to begin the process of reshoring a semiconductor industry that is both equitable and sustainable. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Xu Boren from the Environmental Rights Foundation. We are based in Taiwan, and we are an environmental and legal organization. We provide legal and advocacy support to the grassroots community. And to watching the expansion of ICT industry has been one of my working areas since 2010. So I feel really both honored and urgent to be here today. I want to bring a very important message that I think the fellows in the United States might really need to hear. That is the advanced chip manufacturing we will going to have in Taiwan and also in US, like 2 nano project, is a really challenge we've never seen before. So I first start with the common environmental and social challenges in semi-industry in Taiwan. First is toxicity, but you will hear a lot of experts to talk about this, so I won't talk more about this. But in recent years, we are more aware of like water and energy is a rapid increase of the resource demand, and usually leads to the regional shortage in the surrounding area of the industry. And since this industry will consume a lot of resource, so it definitely will lead to generate a lot of waste. So the waste management is also the problem. And what's more, as the industry cluster continue to grow, the surrounding urban area also expand very rapidly. So the urban externality also brings a lot of problems like traffic and land and house speculation and also land grabbing issue. So it's all the problem we face in Taiwan. Okay. But we know the industry brings a lot of problems, but our civil society has grown stronger in recent years. We have more capacity to deal with this kind of problem. For example, nowadays we have many civil science-based investigation conducted by the local community to look into the toxic residue left in the surrounding area. And this picture is a group of monks in Hsinchu City. Is the famous Hsinchu Science Park located, and they successfully initiated and passed a local referendum for demanding a stricter regulation on clean water. And across country, we have seen many protests and also lawsuits against the unsound science park expansion, and it leads to a relatively more accountable process for the new project to build. But unfortunately, it faced some pushback due to the geopolitics change. Oh, sorry. But, okay. While the civil society has grown stronger, the industry itself has a little progress. I think the TSMC is a good example. So the famous case is their water cycling system. They can recycle the one drop of water and use it 3.5 times. And in recent years, they invest a lot in reclaimed water technology. So now they can directly use the reclaimed water on the chips manufacturing. That's something they cannot achieve before. So we also see some progress in the industry. But however, then the 2 nanos project has come. It's really like Godzilla, the monster from Japan, to jump out from the deep sea. So that brings really, really serious challenge we have ever thought before. I will share a story. In 2021, I first heard the 2 nano project from the local, from the Hsinchu local group, and they told me the new fab, which has 4 factories, they will consume 120,000 tons of water per day. So at the beginning, I think this number might be incorrect, because at that time, the whole Hsinchu Science Park, which has been 40 years development, and include probably 1/3 of all TSMC Taiwan facilities. And it only consumed 140,000 tons of water per day. So how can only 4 factories, 1 fab, consume nearly 90% of total science park? It's impossible, but unfortunately, it's real. So on this slide, I just calculate, we will have 13 factories of 2 nano project, which will locate in northern, central, and southern Taiwan, we will have 3 fabs and 13 factories. And the total energy and water demand for these 13 factories is already equal to all the facilities that operate in Taiwan in year 2022. It's already equal. That means only 1 generation of chips production, their resource demand already equal to all previous generation facilities in Taiwan. That's really horrible. Wow. Okay. Uh-oh. Okay, thank you. And since the TSMC has announced the rest of 5 factories in Phoenix will use 2 nano or more advanced techniques, so that means you will at least have 1 2 nano fabs in here. So I began to look into how will it impact your local carrying capacity. So in terms of energy, the peak demand of the electricity is 8.1 billion kilowatt hour per year. It's equal to 30.6% of Phoenix total electricity consumption. And about water, it's nearly 26 million gallons ton per day, is 9% of Phoenix potable water supply in 2024. And about the waste, it will generate 2,000 tons of waste per day. It's already much more than Phoenix total municipal waste volume in the year of 2018. So the TSMC number is collected from the approved EIA, so it's official number. And the Phoenix number is I can find on the internet from the Phoenix city government. So and checked by CCU partner. So that would be correct. But I'm open for the suggestion. Okay. But you might say, as I have mentioned before, TSMC is a responsible company. They will use some metric renewable technique to solve the problem. But the fact is the volume is there. So that still will be the problem. So in terms of renewable energy, TSMC has promised they will use 100% of renewable energy for all the global facilities. So for 2 nano project, that will equivalent to nearly 10% of Arizona renewable energy generation in 2024. And about the recurrent water, TSMC in Taiwan, they promised they will use 100% of recurrent water for the 2 nano project. But they can only generate 30,000 tons per day by themselves. So it means it needs more from the municipal facilities. It's nearly like 18 million gallons per day. It's equal to nearly 14% of Phoenix treated wastewater in 2024. And the tricky one is the waste. In Taiwan, TSMC has promised there will be 90% of reuse. So, but in the most optimistic scenario, if they have 90% of reuse, it remains 200 tons of the general waste and toxic waste per day. It still occupies 70% of Phoenix City's daily garbage volume. But in Taiwan, why they can promise 90% reuse is because most of the waste is liquid chemical waste. So the many big chemical companies in Taiwan, they are willing to buy this waste to generate less purified liquid chemical and sell them to the other ICT company. But since the scale and behavior of industry might be different in US, so we are not sure whether TSMC can promise 90% of reuse of waste in US and in Phoenix. So that will be the problem. Okay, so I think that brings first of all is your infrastructure can sustain the advanced chip manufacturing here. And even though you are so great that you can sustain all the renewal they need, and that apparently they will crowd out other industry users to access the renewable resource. It already happened in Taiwan. In Taiwan, TSMC has become the largest a green energy buyer and crowd out other company for access it. So today I raised three I think, really crucial questions for you. First one is, can your local infrastructure really handle this kind of extreme resource demand project? And second one, so what is the environmental and human rights impact might arise when your government and industry try to prioritize to sustain the advanced chip manufacturing? And last, so does this firm, like TSMC, has the plan to have a consultation with the community and local rights holder to prevent this kind of risk? I think it's a really crucial question to you before you welcome this really fascinating project to come here. Okay. So to conclude, there's Moore's law represent that how industry growing fast. So we know the industry is really changing, and also geopolitics also changing very fast. So I think the best strategy for our CSOs and for our communities and workers is we should evolve with the industry. So when the industry scale up, our awareness and solidarity should scale up too. But not, thank you. But not for stopping the innovation, but to make sure the industry will stay accountable and transparent and just. Okay, thank you for your time. I'll stop here.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Sanjeev Pandita. I represent today ICRT Network, which is a partner of CCU, Chips Community United. But I also work with Solidarity Center, which is a global labor rights organization and outreach wing of the United States labor organizations towards the global movement. Before moving to United States, I was based in Hong Kong for nearly 2 decades, organizing and working on occupational and environmental health issues across China and many parts of Asia. I will not repeat some of the things that have been said in the morning by Judith and others. We understand, first time I came to United States 20 years back, I understood electronic and chip manufacturing is actually a chemical industry. We were told repeatedly in Asia, as you are being told again here, that it is a clean industry because there are no stacks, there are no visible smoke stacks, so it is a clean industry. That's where we were told. Everywhere, whenever there was investment in electronic manufacturing, chip assembly, chip fabrication is a different thing because that is held by very few countries, but assembly we're at many places. But we were told it is a clean, green industry. So there is no pollution, and it was a different shift from the garment where most of the workers used to work. They were told you can now work inside an air-conditioned, clean factory. They didn't realize what it was, what was spoken in the morning, and what we realized eventually. This is a chemical industry. So, we see it as and one more thing, it is a complex industry with a very complex supply chain that goes down to the homes, to the informal workers, many places. You might think chip is a very sophisticated thing. Yes, it is. But some of the things, the parts, the way it's assembled, can be mined in Congo, some of the things it reads, or some of the assembly may be happening in Suzhou in a home, So it is a very complex supply chain. And at top tier, you have the key companies which we have spoken in the morning. They hold tremendous power. I think it is the most powerful industry right now in the world, in terms of the capital accumulation, wealth accumulation, and amount of production they do. Yeah. China is increasing, that's, I'm not going to touch this topic, but this is a topic in itself. Its appetite for high-end chips is also leading to restructuring of the global supply chain. The early warnings came from here, so that's why I'm surprised, we are saying not to learn from the history. We were talking about it 20 years back in Asia. We should learn from history. It does not need to happen in this way. We need chips, we need modern industry, but it should not come at the cost of workers and communities. But it's surprising that it went to Asia and is coming back here in the same way. What are the lessons learned? We found there were early warnings here in the Silicon Valley. Public advocates raised alarm about toxic factory conditions. This is a New York Times article, long time back, worries about toxins grow in Silicon Valley. Santa Clara Center for Occupational Health and Silicon Valley Toxic Coalition, these were some of the few initial organizations that documented. Of course, there was a lot happening in the Silicon Valley at that time. There were also chemical leaks. I think we heard in the morning, Silicon Valley has the largest number of Superfund sites, which I was also surprised when I came here. And, I just want to show you one case. This boy, Mark, his mother, Yvette, was exposed when she was pregnant. She didn't know what chemicals she was working. This is here in Silicon Valley. And she didn't know what chemicals she was using. They never provided that information. And I actually, when I used to come here, we used to meet workers who used to work for chips like National Semiconductor. There was a Scottish woman, Helen Clark. She died of stomach cancer. She was never told what she was working with. And I met her here and she told me, Sanjeev, I don't want compensation. I just wanted them to say sorry for once, that we are sorry. They never said that. But the sorry came. I'm going to come to that. So we moved to Asia, but what is important, the shift also exported occupational and environmental risks, including chemical exposures and unsafe working conditions. You see, this is a typical assembly plant in Asia. Many of you must have heard about Foxconn. Assembly in a place, 100,000 workers working. These are like cities and exposure happening at a mass scale. And these are the people who make and die also for making our electronics, including chips. Mining, this is the whole life cycle. Manufacturing, it says, employs more than 18 million workers. This is a conservative estimate. If we also take informal sector, the number is much bigger. And majority of them are in East Asia. China is the largest employer, and Southeast Asia. And this sector we don't talk about. It's what happens to them. Once you're using your electronic phones, computers, what happens to them? They're in China, India, Africa, dumped there, ripped apart in a very, crude manner, exposing millions. And there is a large number of workforce who works in recycling in a very unsafe manner. This is a quote from a Foxconn worker, posted anonymously. Work harder than a donkey, eat food worse than pigs feed, wake up earlier than a rooster, finish work than anyone else, behave like a good grandchild, look better than anyone else, age faster than anyone else. These are actual working conditions in electronic manufacturing, including some of the chips. So, as I said, complex supply chain, exploitation of the most vulnerable workers. That includes women. If you see employment in the semiconductor or electronic industry, majority are young women. This is a trend globally, and ILO has documented it. You can see it. Migrant workers exploited. If you see Malaysia and TSMC, a lot of migrant workers from Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, all other places. Very insecure, vulnerable, exploited, including Malaysia and Taiwan. As Judith mentioned, very difficult to organize, anti-union industry. These are some of the pictures of the mining, how the mining is done. There are a lot of things happening inside mining. Apart from accidents, we are seeing lots of people getting sick due to occupational exposures. And manufacturing, they're exposed to, these are the chemicals, benzene, trichloroethylene, cadmium, lead. Health consequences include cancers, infertility, miscarriages, birth defects, chronic illnesses, harm to the next generation. We saw it, I will come back to it. We were seeing, when I was in Hong Kong, I was seeing day after day workers getting sick, workers having cancers, from China to Malaysia to Indonesia, Philippines. It was increasing. And most of the time they were told, oh, these are normal cancers, It has nothing to do with what you are working with. E-waste, as I talked, there are 24 million workers working, This is one of the photos in Delhi, this is how they take out the metals. And exposure happens to children also, at a very large scale. One thing which I want to emphasize is exposure to chemicals. I had a slide which I took it off, but it is recognized by the International Labour Organization is one of the largest exposure to workers globally, and more than 200 million workers are exposed every year. And electronics is one of the largest sector where the exposure is happening. This is a picture of Samsung semiconductor plant. This, you can see an open acid bath. We suspect this was one of the reasons why people got cancer in Samsung. If you go to any factory inside Asia, it's very difficult for workers and also communities to get information about what chemicals are being used. Workers are not told, even though there are laws, some countries may have right to know, but it's very difficult to get the information. They will say it's patented and we can't tell you that information. The data is concealed. So it's very hard. One of the difficult part for us is how to get the name of the chemical. Remember a case in China, all they knew was banana oil, and there was cases of cancers happening they were using N-hexane, but for months and months, we did not know the N-hexane they were using. We just knew their common name, banana oil, because they were not telling them. Then came the international collaboration. I want to mention two important networks. I was part of this Asian Network for Rights of Occupational and Environmental Victims, which is a victims-led network or survivors network based in more than 16 Asian countries, including Taiwan. We have a strong membership from Taiwan, also from Korea. These are the victims who take the lead, building the agency. And we saw increasing cases of illnesses. And we came to US and found, oh, hang on, there is a history here. There are communities and workers who have been through this, and it was easy for us to link. We linked with Silicon Valley Toxic Coalition, and then there was International Coalition of Campaign for Responsible Technology. We came together and then started exchanging, learning from each other. And it was to build the agency of the impacted. I'm just going quickly because I have a short time here. So what happened at that time, we came to know there are some cancers emerging in Korea. Our partners, members from Korea, started expressing concern. SHOPS is one of the victims groups or the survivors group in Korea. And this Yumi, it's her father